Today I want to talk to you about sex.
An estimated 95% of Americans will have sex before marriage.
What does purity mean to you?
Saving my kiss for the wedding. That's why I wanted it.
People cannot control themselves, and so many are having immoral sex outside of marriage. People should get married.
We're having sex, don't get me wrong. We're just having sex at the wrong time and with the wrong people.
You're hooking up with them and you rip away, and then you hook up with them and you rip away. You will never be everything God called you to be because people are walking around with pieces of you. But it's crazy, you've had 16 boyfriends and 7 sex partners, and you're 19.
You don't want syphilis, do you? And everybody's smiling and having a good time until there's herpes on your lip. What are you doing? It was one of the worst, most horrific handlings of what sex is and what it isn't that I ever sat through.
So no, this isn't clickbait. You are going to watch my episode on purity culture where I interview a couple writers. We'll get to that in just a second. But I wanted to say thank you to our patrons. As you can see, we've had a very big development in our life. This is one and only Maddie. Oh, can you even see him?
Yeah, you can see him.
This is Maddie, our little boy. He was born a little over a week ago, and we're so excited to be able to begin this new journey. Obviously, this does mean a little bit of change for the channel in the sense that I'm going to have less time in the immediate future to work on episodes. We got to take care of the family, things like that. So I hope you guys understand. We do have several episodes lined up and that are already in the queue, so we should be able to upload content in the near future. But if there's a little bit more of a delay in when content comes out, you guys understand. I'm taking care of the things that matter most to me right now in my life, and that's this little guy, that's Emily who's behind the camera, and just, you know, Ronan over here who's trembling like a scared little dog in public like he is. But we're going to be working on content. We are uploading kind of behind the scenes stuff, family videos, vlogs, that kind of stuff on our Patreon. I'd love your opinion on if you want to see some of those things on the channel. Most of it will be on Patreon, but maybe it'd be fun for Emily and I to share kind of our journey or something like that with this little guy with you guys. Anyways, this is the episode. I hope you guys enjoy. It was a fun one. I learned a lot. I definitely come across as someone who has a lot of questions and not a lot of answers, but that's kind of par for the course, and so I hope you guys enjoy.
I've always been very interested in sex and the female experience.
This is my friend Morgan. We do a YouTube show together called The Free Flow Show, and I invited her to join me on this episode as a co-host. Our guests for this episode are Sheila Gregoire and her daughter Rebecca Lindenbach, who recently wrote the book The Great Sex Rescue, subtitle, The Lies You've Been Taught and How to Recover What God Intended. More info on that to come.
Because it became very clear to me in college and in grad school that the conversation surrounding sex didn't really include women most of the time. Yeah. And it was almost just like
women don't need it.
Right. Yeah, we don't even need sex. We don't even it's not for us. And then I became very interested in the physical side of things. So I'm an occupational therapist, and one of the big areas of OT is function and things that we do daily, and sex falls into an activity of daily living. So I became very passionate on that side of things. But then the spiritual side of things became very clear to me, oh, wait a minute, there's a huge spiritual component to sex that we're not talking about in the Christian church at all. We say it's a gift, and then we're like, but keep it secret, never talk about it. We don't talk about sex in the church. And then I realized that all my friends getting married were getting this very bad advice. Oh, sex is something that you can do for your husband. It's just an easy thing. Just do it. He'll know that you love him if you have sex with him. And I was sure, the root of that is love and service, and that's beautiful. But we're taking your experience completely out of the equation. Mm-hmm. And the more conversations I had, the more I was oh no, do I need to do something about this? Do I need to start a podcast? That makes me feel very nervous. But yes, the answer is yes. I'm going to do that. I'm going to start having conversations with amazing people like both of you about this and about this thing that we get to do. We get to engage in this beautiful experience together as partners. Not only you, not only me. And a lot of times I'll talk about it and women look at me like I have 14 eyes. They're like, you want to have sex? What do you mean? I do it because it's my duty. So yeah, we're gonna do this. We're just gonna start having these conversations because I'm so grateful that you guys have been blazing this trail, and I'm just like gonna hop on and follow it because I'm like, yeah, I love it. Let's do it.
Yes, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Oh man, it's exciting.
So, in case that wasn't abundantly clear, Morgan's going to start her own podcast where this is kind of the focal point of the conversation, and I wanted to be able to bring her in as a connection point to you guys, but also maybe perhaps using this episode and kind of the little community that I have as a launching point for her as well. Plus, I think the conversation is just going to be way more interesting with someone like Morgan. Kind of helping us navigate this as well. So I hope that that's okay with you guys.
Yeah, we all have to be in this together, right? Like, we gotta just hold each other up because it's a tough road.
Yep.
Awesome. I'd love to start with kind of the story behind things, because what I see that's taking place in a large part due to your guys' work is an evolution in the conversation of sex. But I'm wondering if we can kind of rewind a couple decades and if I can have an insight as to what the conversation was like kind of growing up for you, Sheila, as you were young. What were some of the lines that you were told, and how do they compare, how do they contrast to what is being kind of parroted right now?
Sure. Yeah. Well, interestingly, I think I grew up with a much healthier church background about sex. Like, in the 70s, we started to talk about sex in the church, and it got kind of weird because it was mostly like a reaction to feminism of the 60s. So everyone kind of doubled down. And there were some super conservative books that were written in the 70s and 80s. But in general, when I was in youth group, our church was really quite healthy. Like we taught what I would call a biblical sexual ethic, which is, wait until you're married as much as you can. But there wasn't any extra shame put on girls than boys. We always talked about how far is too far, but it was in a mixed group, so it wasn't just directed at girls or anything like that. And I even remember I was at a youth conference and I wanted to fall down into my seat and disappear, but the guy at the front was talking about the clitoris. We were at a youth conference and they said, hey, God made this because he wants sex to be for women too, and you need to know that. And so that was my experience at age 16, 17. Then everything fell apart around the time that you guys were growing up. And I remember when you were 13, I gave you I Kissed Dating Goodbye, and I thought that was a good idea.
Well, because the thing is, when you're growing up in a church culture where you are frankly actually relatively, positive about sex, like sex is supposed to be pleasurable, it's just about where the appropriate boundaries lie so that everyone's healthy and safe. When it's not about shame or purity culture, but it's just about how do we live a chaste lifestyle and enjoy it when it's appropriate, that's very different. So then when the Christian world puts out these things like I Kissed Dating Goodbye, like the Brio magazines, like the purity culture, purity balls and purity rings and stuff, it's easy to assume that because it's from the church that you grew up in and it's healthy, well, it must be healthy for my kids too.
Yeah. And so I have another daughter who's a couple of years younger than Rebecca, and so they were raised with this. But by the time you got to be 16, I had ditched it. So I don't think so. Katie didn't get it as bad. No, I don't think. but yeah.
Yeah, it's just for anyone, because I know that a lot of people on your channel will know Katie Gregoire, now Katie Emerson is my sister. Yeah, her daughter. So.
Katie's awesome. We love her very much and are glad for her advent to social media for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting to hear that you feel like a lot of this is good within its proper context, because I think I was kind of late to the game growing up in Southern California. Maybe the prevalence of purity culture wasn't as strong in other parts of the country. I remember reading I Kissed Dating Goodbye and Every Man's Battle like when I was in college. And so it wasn't the kind of thing that I got when I was, 11 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old. So I actually elected to read those books. And I thought it was a good thing for me because it wasn't until I reached college that I kind of had my come to Jesus moment where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do things, quote unquote, right. And so when I'm starting to see the buzz on social media that these books, these teachers, that this concept overall is damaging, to me, my first gut reaction is really like, why? Like, how could that possibly be bad when this book is giving me tools as a man to combat my lust. Now, Morgan, we're going to throw into this conversation right now, she had a very different experience. She grew up kind of in the middle of all this from a young age. And so, Morgan, I'd love for you to kind of bring in where it was for you. It was a very different experience than it was for me.
Yeah. So I grew up in a church that didn't even talk about it really. Like I think we had one meeting where sex was brought up and it just wasn't a very positive thing, but it also wasn't very negative necessarily. But it became very clear to me in the way that we talked about men and women that, like boys and girls, really, that boys were always going to have this thing, this addiction to lust. Like they were always going to have to like bounce their eyes or whatever we read about. And that girls were always going to kind of have to give their body up. Like they will always have to participate in this service of their body. And I hated that. I hated it. But instead of recognizing the error of giving my body up, I decided to kind of flip the script a bit. And early in high school and into college, I decided to use boys that way. Like, okay, well, I know it's expected of me to do that. So instead of succumbing to that pressure, I'm going to force you to do that for me. Which, you guessed it, created a very toxic balance. Like it wasn't positive when the roles were switched. And so, yeah, I remember hearing my friends talk about how at the pulpit pastors would say, if you're married and your husband cheats on you, but it's because you have not been having sex with him, guess what? That's your fault. And like, you need to recognize the error of your ways. And so, yeah, it was bad. It wasn't, I didn't know that it was bad until I realized what was true. And until I realized the way that I've been believing sex to be was actually very damaging. So that's kind of my background with intimacy in general. And so because of that, intimacy was not intimacy for me because it was an exchange. It was the way that I got power over whoever I was with. It was how I got to be in control and manipulate situations. And it felt good for me. Like, so I just kept doing it. I was like, well, this is working. We're just going to keep this ball rolling. Not realizing that I was actually demolishing the beauty of what sex actually is. So yeah, I don't know. It was bad.
I guess that's kind of my question though, is like, in which way, in what ways, maybe plural, is this damaging other than, because for me, the focus, it wasn't, there was no conversation. It was very much, what are the boundaries and when should you have sex, for example. But for me, I never perceived the damage that was being done to myself and especially to my female peers at the time. Do you guys remember for you when the light bulb first came on that you realized like, oh, this, not only is this not working, but this is actively causing harm?
Well, we had inklings. Like we're like, there's no possible way that this is healthy, but we didn't know. Like it was our opinion. And so what we did a year ago was we decided that we didn't want it to be opinion anymore. We wanted to have data. And so we did the largest survey that's ever been done of Christian women. We surveyed 20,000 Christian women about their marital and sex lives. And then we asked them what evangelical teachings about sex they believed or they were taught. And so we can now tell you, like, if you believe all men struggle with lust, it's every man's battle, or if you believe you're obligated to have sex with your husband whenever he wants it, what does that do to your orgasm rates, to your ability to get aroused, to your rates of sexual pain, to your marital satisfaction? And it's not pretty.
Yeah, so we not only figured out which teachings are harmful, we figured out how are they harmful.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And
so
we
pumped.
did this, and it was a long survey. It took like over 30 minutes for most people to complete.
Yeah.
And again, we had like 22,000 total, 20,000 of which were Christian. We had a small control group of non-Christians.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that's a lot of women who are very interested in this subject
and
to give 30 minutes.
This is our new book, The Great Sex Rescue. So it's all based on that survey. The lies that you were taught. Yeah. And we just thought, okay, we need to take this out of the realm of opinion.
Yeah.
And we need to put it into data. And we need to be able to say, no, look, okay, if you want to teach that, you can. But then she's 38% less likely to orgasm. So your choice, buddy.
The But this is the thing, it's just like what you're saying, Justin, right? Like a lot of people read these books and they say, well, I wasn't harmed, right? Like I didn't suddenly start objectifying every woman that I saw. I didn't suddenly start like becoming a marital rapist, right? Like these things, like it seems like the most extreme thing. And so when a lot of people read these books and they don't become the most extreme example, it's hard to understand that these books do cause harm. But what we've found is that what happens is that the people who are reading the book, it's often those who are already vulnerable who get the worst case scenario. So if you're married to an abusive spouse and you read books that tell you must have sex whenever he wants it, you must have sex or he'll have an affair or he'll watch pornography. You know, he has a need you don't have. This is about him. This isn't about you. When you say these kinds of messages, we heard from so many women that this is what happened in their marriages, and it was what led them to be raped over and over and over again. And for 2 different women who I talked to, they said the first person who had ever even told them the concept of marital rape was their divorce lawyer, because they had read every book that they could find on this in their conservative Christian circles, and none of them discuss these kinds of things. And so you have these books where if you're a good-hearted person, you're not actually going to act them out. And so you say they don't cause harm if you're a good-hearted person, but what about if it's put in the hands of someone who's not good-hearted? You know, like, it's not fair to say that a book doesn't cause harm because it doesn't cause harm to everyone, right? And I think we all agree with that. We serve a God who goes after the lost one, right? I say this a lot. He doesn't say, well, it was just one. You know, and I think that's what we need to recognize in our resources is that when we have these messages that permeate, that say, you know, women don't matter and men's sexual urges need to all be met at any moment, we are giving ammunition to abusive men to rape their wives and think that it's God ordained.
Can I tell you the story of Aunt Matilda?
Yeah, please.
Please do.
Okay, so Tim LaHaye in the book The Act of Marriage, which was published in 1976, it was like the book that you read if you got married between 76 and 95. Okay, so most pastors today read The Act of Marriage before they were married. Okay. So the book. And in it, he tells the story of a young woman who's getting married, and her aunt comes alongside her and tells her that sex is terrible, that it's basically legalized rape, and he makes her not like sex. And so Tim LaHaye is telling this story as if Aunt Matilda did this terrible thing to this niece. And he explains that when Aunt Matilda got married, her husband held her down while she was kicking and screaming and raped her on their wedding night. And this continued throughout their marriage. And as he's describing this terrible situation, how Aunt Matilda never got a good view of sex, he talks about Aunt Matilda and her equally unhappy husband. So he calls the rapist equally unhappy as the rape victim.
No, it's just horrible.
Okay.
And that anecdote, that book went through 4 revisions, 4 updates, and it was never taken out. No editor ever said, maybe we shouldn't say that a rapist is equally unhappy as his rape victim. Like, maybe that's not a good anecdote.
Yeah, or maybe we shouldn't make the rape victim the antagonist of the story. Like, yeah.
But that's the kind of thing. Like, we looked at the 13 best-selling Christian sex and marriage books. Once we identified which are the teachings that are unhealthy, like which are the teachings in the evangelical church that are highly correlated with negative, with just bad sex outcomes and bad marriage outcomes for women. Then we looked at our bestsellers, and we had this 12-point rubric of healthy sexuality, and we applied that rubric to all of our bestsellers to see how they do. And most of them did very abysmally. Some of them did really well. Gift of Sex by the Penners, excellent book, 47 out of 48 on our rubric. Boundaries in Marriage, very good book. So like some books did well, but most did really badly. But the one thing that none of our evangelical books really talked about at all was a robust conversation of consent in marriage.
And what we think has just happened is, you know, we all talk about purity culture all the time, right? But what happens in purity culture is you're just told don't have sex until you're married, and then you get to have all the sex you want. And so there's no need to talk about consent. There's no need to talk about your experience with sex. There's no need to talk about, you know, boundaries around sex, because the only boundary that matters is if you have a wedding ring. And that's part of the conversation that we want to change is we want to talk about how in marriage, like simply saying wait until marriage doesn't mean you don't talk about consent.
Yeah.
Right? Like your spouse still needs to consent. Like, and that's what we all want, right? Like we don't want partners who are having duty sex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Definitely.
It's not enjoyable.
Yeah.
Unless you have a strange power fetish, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's be honest here. And I just, and I know we started off on the really, really dark, deep stuff. But we'll talk about more of the everyday for the average person reading these books as well. But it's like what you were saying, Morgan, where, you know, we're raised being told men need this and girls are just going to have to put up with the fact that you're going to have to give it. And where on earth do we see that in Scripture? Like, where on earth? I mean, I'm sorry, Song of Solomon, she is very much looking forward to whatever they're doing under the pear tree or whatever. You know, like, they are both.
That's amazing.
You know, they're both right there. And so how did we get to this place where like women are told, yeah, you're really going to not like sex at all. It's totally not for you. It's just something you have to put up with. It's like, you know, do the groceries, you know, wash the laundry, do the husband, like checklist. And what we just want to do is to let couples know, like sex is allowed to be fun.
Yeah. It is.
Sex should be fun. Sex is for both of you. And frankly, she should be enjoying it. You shouldn't have to spend your whole life arguing with each other in this weird power struggle over sex because it's something that is supposed to be done together. It's supposed to be intimate. It's supposed to be a knowing, and it's supposed to make both of you feel really good. So why wouldn't you both want it unless there's a reason one of you doesn't want it?
Yeah.
And that's what's been missing in the conversation is her orgasm.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%.
Because I'm sorry, in our study, we talked to, when we looked at the 20,000 women, we found that women who orgasm reliably are very unlikely to stop having sex.
Yes.
Which should not be a mind-blowing statistic.
Right? Like that is like simple math. You know what I mean? If 1 + 1 = 2, like it's all just going to add up. It's all going to be good. You're just going to keep doing it. Like that is so interesting. Oh
exactly.
my word.
In other words, if a wife is not having sex, we need to stop telling her, you need to have sex more. We need to start telling him, have you ever heard of foreplay, buddy?
Hello. Hey there. You ever heard of that? Huh? You ever heard of that? Oh my goodness.
That's so funny.
Yeah,
like, these are the kinds of conversations that everyone in church was wishing was happening, but I think that very few people, if any, have the courage to have that conversation. Like you're mentioning at the very beginning of our conversation that they mentioned the word clitoris in church. Like, whoa,
yeah,
hold on, what's going on here? Yeah. So, you know, one of the things that I think it can be easy to kind of distill the book down to, and I'm fairly confident that this is not the emphasis of the book, is all the ways that the church is wrong and terrible and evil when it comes to their teaching about sex, but there's a redemptive part to it. There is actually something healthy and even biblical, I would say, that you are wanting to direct people's attention towards. So it's not that things aren't working, so let's twist the scriptures in a way to suit our agenda. But I'm assuming at some point you sit down and you take a look at the text and you start to find principles that maybe have been long neglected. What have you been finding?
That's something we really wanted to do. When we were looking at all of our findings, we were quite depressed for a while.
Makes sense.
Let's be honest here, okay? We're not going to give you like a pretty picture of the current evangelical sex conversation. It's pretty bad, right?
Yeah.
But something we wanted to do was not just deconstruct. We wanted to help people reconstruct as well.
Right.
Right? So you take out everything that's not of Jesus, and we go back to who Jesus is, and we remember that. And so at the end of every chapter in our book, we put in these rescuing and reframing sections where it's like, instead of saying this, say this, right? So like, instead of saying ye has a need that you don't have, say God created both men and women to have a sex drive and to enjoy sex, right? So it's just that simple.
Or instead of saying all men struggle with lust, it's every man's battle, you say many people struggle with lust. Often men more than women, but many women too. But lust is not a struggle you can't get over. And the way to get through lust is to learn to see everyone else as image bearers of God.
It's not just to.
It's like it's not rocket science, right? But like, let's point back to Jesus. Let's point back to those principles, that are in the Bible that teach us just how to honor each other, how to give dignity to each other, how to remember that relationship and intimacy is the point of all of this. It's not just entitlement. So let's reframe this into something which is healthier.
Oh, we have to. I'm here for a wedding. So I was just with like 14 girls at a bachelorette party. And me being like the obsessed person that I am with having this conversation about sex, I start entering this conversation about orgasms. And every single girl in the room, I would say most were married or in serious relationships, had a problem with orgasming during sex. Like none of it, and I kind of highlighted the lovely information that's brought up in this book and how like 95% of men will have an orgasm during sex. And if they're not, right, kind of like how you point out in the book, there's might be something wrong if you're a man, right? If you're a woman though, it's like, only like 48% of you will. Like, I'm really sorry about that. And they were like, okay, well, how do you then? Like, how often should I be having sex if I want to have an orgasm? Like, is it a marathon thing? Like, I just have to keep doing it and keep trying and like maybe finally I'll have an orgasm. And it was mind-blowing to me how many women really thought like, I just don't orgasm and I probably never will. And I don't really know if that's possible for me. So what have you guys found in all of the research? Like, are most women kind of in that boat where it's just like, it's not going to happen for me and I don't know if it's possible?
Yeah, I think a lot of women are, and a lot of women feel like I am broken. Like there is something wrong with me. My vagina doesn't work, but like whatever it is, I am broken. And their husbands often feel that way too. Like she is broken. She just doesn't like sex. And a lot of that is because we tend to define sex from a male point of view. Like if I were to ask you guys, and I'm not going to do this, but if I were to ask you, did you have sex last night? Okay.
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately.
You're at the wedding.
Nope. My wife is pregnant. We're 3 weeks out from having a baby, so
you can ask Justin and I any question. We will answer any question.
Odds go down.
but like even asking that question, you're picturing something in your mind. Okay, you're picturing something very specific, and the specific thing you're picturing is probably something like he puts slot A into slot B and moves around until he feels good, right? That tends to be, we're picturing intercourse, right? Well, what we found is that of the women who can reach orgasm, only around, just under 40% of them reach orgasm through intercourse alone.
Okay.
So most women need a lot of foreplay, and for most women, there are other routes to orgasm which are way more reliable, okay? But when you get married, picture a couple getting married. They grew up in purity culture, or maybe they messed around a bit before marriage, but it was like hurried or whatever. You get married and okay, now I'm supposed to have sex.
Right.
This is it. I am supposed to have sex. And so first of all, she feels like she doesn't have a choice because this is her wedding night. So she no longer has agency over her body. She has to have sex. And what is sex? Slot A into B, moves around until he climaxes. So they go ahead and do that. And it doesn't feel very good. And so they figure, well, I guess she just doesn't like sex. And what they've missed is the whole sexual progression. How it doesn't just start with intercourse. You've got a whole lot of other things going on. And he'll say, well, tell me what you want me to do. But she has no clue what she wants him to do because they've never figured out the arousal piece.
Yeah, and the whole idea of figuring out the arousal piece and figuring out that progression is biblical. Like, I mean, you look at Song of Solomon and the whole thing is this yearning and this chasing and this back and forth until finally they can be together. Or you have even the idea, do not awaken love before it's appointed time. We are supposed to awaken love. Like, there is this mentality in about female sexuality that we can be awoken, but that doesn't happen by hurried intercourse after a very long, stressful day. And so if that's your first experience with sex, then it's hard to go backwards, right? That's the problem, is it's hard to go backwards. And so if you start with intercourse, every sexual experience after that, you feel like it should end in intercourse, right? Or that it should end in sex of some sort. But what if the way that women really experience orgasm or train their bodies to be orgasmic is through awakening love, not splashing it with cold water. Right?
Good image.
Right.
You see what I mean? Because I
Yes.
think that a lot of women who struggle with orgasm, because we talked to so many women who deal with this, and I did a ton of research last year because we created a whole course for women who struggle with orgasm based in peer-reviewed research.
Yes.
And what a lot of it comes down to is that women who are unaware of their arousal patterns struggle with orgasm. But how can you be aware of what makes you aroused or how your body feels aroused if you've had to spend your whole life suppressing it? You know, if you've been so scared of making a mistake, and then your first time having sex, you were tired. You had the most stressful week of your life, followed by the biggest day of your life, and now it is 2:00 in the morning because you're finally back in the apartment after all the guests have left, and you're like, he's wanting sex.
And your flight leaves at 9 in the morning.
You're describing the bride of this wedding. Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of people's first sexual experience is like 4-minute wedding night sex. And then they
Maybe.
think not all sex
Maybe
has to
4.
offer. Yes, I'm being very generous.
Yeah.
Is that all that sex has to offer? Right? Because they're not aroused, and sex does not feel good if you're not aroused. And the difference for men versus women, and this is why I think men have a higher orgasm rate than women do in a lot of marriages. Women can have sex if they're not aroused.
You're right.
Men are typically not able to have intercourse if they're not aroused.
Yeah.
Right.
And so if a man is having intercourse, he is aroused, which means intercourse is the kind of action that leads men to orgasm.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas women are able to engage in intercourse without actually being aroused. And so what happens though is that teaches their brain intercourse is not arousing to me.
Oh my word. I have never considered this.
Like the opposite of Pavlov's dog.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it cements in your brain intercourse isn't
And I'm broken. And the other thing is that we are taught our whole lives he needs this. This is how he feels loved.
Yes.
Right? Like Emerson Eggerichs in Love and Respect. If your husband is typical, he has a need you don't have. Right? These are the kinds of things that we hear all the time in our Christian marriage books. And so then you have intercourse, and maybe she's starting to feel aroused. Like maybe there's a slimmer of something.
And she gets all excited.
And then he's done. And now he's really sleepy.
Right.
But she kind of likes something. And so he half-heartedly tries something, but he's really sleepy. And she's feeling selfish. And he's looking at her like, is this working yet? And then she's like, I don't know. And she's all a bundle of nerves. Well, how's that going to feel good? So she feels selfish if she asks for anything else. And so we've just got these really negative patterns that we often start sex with, which makes women not orgasm. But what we also found, which I think is even more interesting, because that's kind of obvious. Like, I mean, if you talk that through, it's like what you just did, Morgan. You're like, oh my God, right?
Right.
But the other piece that we found is that another big thing blocking women's orgasm is what we believe about sex. So it's not even what we do or how we act, it's what we believe. And there are certain key beliefs that are really prevalent in evangelicalism that hinder her orgasm rates. And one of the worst ones is this idea that you are obligated to have sex with your husband when he wants it. So that it's not okay to say no. You know, that has really terrible repercussions on her orgasm rates, but it also greatly increases her rates of sexual pain, which is something no one talks about. Like, you guys, if erectile dysfunction, we all know what that means, right?
Oh my word, little blue pill, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah. You hear it advertised for it all the time. Vaginismus.
Not as common. Hello. I only do because of my interest in the pelvic floor.
Yes. Well, vaginismus is a sexual dysfunction that women can experience where the muscles of the vaginal wall contract involuntarily. Okay, so she's not doing it deliberately, but it makes penetration really, really painful, if not impossible. And of people in their 20s and 30s, vaginismus is way more common than erectile dysfunction. And yet we never talk about it.
Because,
never.
A lot of women, even if they're in pain, they're able to have intercourse. And so there's no problem, right?
Right.
Like sex is happening.
And that was my story. Like I had vaginismus when we were first married, and I felt like I had to push myself through it because that was the only way he could feel loved. Because that's what the act of marriage told me. So my pain didn't matter as much as his pleasure because that was the only way he could feel loved.
Oh,
and that was in your head.
Yeah, that wasn't my husband telling me that.
No,
was
I'm
his
sure.
book
Right.
that I had read telling me that. And of Christian women, remember that Christian women have twice the rate of sexual pain as the general population. And just over 20% of women have experienced vaginismus, 7% to the point that penetration is impossible.
Because of the contraction. Wow.
Yeah, we don't talk about it.
No, like at all. So do you mind me asking what that journey ended up looking like? So you had this, sex was uncomfortable. You felt like you had to keep doing it so that your husband felt loved, right? Like this idea that was perpetuated in evangelical Christianity. So then how did sex turn out? Like, how are we currently? You know what I mean? I'm assuming well.
We figured it out.
Right?
We had a weird story. Okay, let me tell you like the worst thing that happened. So in those days, so this was early 90s. So we didn't have pelvic floor physiotherapists, or if we did, nobody knew about them. Let me just say right now, if you're experiencing vaginismus, get thee to a pelvic floor physiotherapist, okay? And also read The Great Sex Rescue. Hold it up, because the two things that are probably impacting you are simple muscular things, which there is treatment for, but also some of your beliefs. And so looking at that in tandem can really help. So that's what I would say to you now. In the 90s, we believed it was all in my head, like that I must have suppressed memories of child sexual abuse or something. So they worked on that. They took me to a gynecologist who believed that the problem was I had sexual shame, which I didn't. And that the way that I was going to get over this was he was going to put my feet up in stirrups and he was going to feel all the different parts of me with my husband there so that I could get used to naming them so that I would feel empowered.
That sounds
horrified.
I ran out. I felt so bad. I literally ran out of the room. And I felt so guilty about that because this was the only therapy offered to me and I wasn't taking it. And now I look back at little 21-year-old me and I'm like, you go, girl. I'm so proud of you.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, my word.
Oh, that's terrible.
My problem, what I now understand is that the root of my vaginismus was feeling like I didn't have a choice. It wasn't that I didn't want to have sex. I really did. But before I got married, I read these books which told me that I didn't have a choice anymore. And if you can't truly say no, you can't say yes.
How did you break out of this echo chamber? Because when the narrative is so strong that like everyone around you, every expert down to the medical professionals are all in harmony singing the same song. Like, how do you break out of this to where you're finally willing to say, no, I'm not crazy. Like what I'm experiencing is legitimate and there are toxic beliefs that have kind of been passed down. Like, how did you get out of that space?
Yeah, a lot of it, we worked on our relationship. I still think some of it was having kids. I think that physically that helped. That's not going to cure everybody, but I think that was a thing for me.
I'm sorry, I'm super ignorant around that. In what way does having children physically help?
Yeah, get stretched.
You're right.
Okay.
You put a
okay, that's what you're referring to.
This is my daughter, by the way, my firstborn. So that doesn't help with everybody. And in fact, for a lot of people who don't have vaginismus, birth trauma can actually trigger it. That's me. Her problem. So it's like stuff can just go wrong. We're physical bodies. So I think some of it was that. Some of it was working on our relationship. A lot of things, we just kept working on it and eventually got better. Grace of God, I don't even know. But at least today I know what to tell people because we know what the research says.
And that's one of the things that we're really hoping for from this book, because I know I just joked about the fact that I suffered from pretty severe birth trauma with my son, and it led to a year of severe vaginismus.
Wow.
Where I will say, to the point where penetration was impossible for a very, very long time.
Wow.
And what I found, and this is something that I find so hopeful about the Great Sex Rescue and the work that we're doing, is I went to eventually go see a new pelvic floor physiotherapy when I moved to a new town. And I told her that I thought I had too much scar tissue from everything that had happened and that I was really worried and all this stuff. And she just checks me out and she's like, no, sweetie, I'm so sorry. You have something called vaginismus that's likely trauma-based. And because of the research we had done, it's like, Vaginismus. Okay, that has a treatment. That has a treatment. And I just, that's the thing, is we need to realize that there are issues that happen. You know, women are anorgasmic. You know, we can experience pain during sex.
Anorgasmic means you can't reach orgasm.
Yes, sorry, yeah, that's like what you were talking about earlier, Morgan, with all of your friends at the bachelor party. But so often women have had nowhere to turn. There's been no help. Right? And what we're hoping to do is to start that conversation so that people know there is help, so that your experience is going to a pelvic floor physiotherapist are much more like mine, where it's like, oh, that's actually a weight off my shoulders because I know I can get through this. And I have, you know, like, and that's, well, and that was very empowering. And that's the great thing about research and evidence-based responses to these teachings, is we can go and we can say, no, you know, this is out of the realm of my insecurities, my anxiety, my feelings about what's happening right now subjectively, and I can say objectively, it is bad to say these things. These things that are happening are harmful, and so if they have harmed me, it's not because I'm weak. It's not because there's something wrong with me or I should have known better. It's because I was fed poison. And that means that we can detox from this, and we can fill ourselves with life-giving messages instead. And that's just what we need in this conversation. Because it's not all in our heads, you know? It's not all our fault. It's not all that we should have been stronger. It's not all that we should have been better. A lot of it is just that we've been sold a faulty bill of goods. Not for me. Mine was just literally traumatic. I just had your standard grade PTSD. We're fine now, though. But like for people whose struggles come because they've been told over and over again, your body, you do not have control over your body anymore. You know, you owe this. You don't have a choice. And also, your experience is secondary in importance to your spouse's.
Yeah. Can I give an example of that?
Love it.
I've got a good example. Okay. So Kevin Lehman in the book Sheet Music talks about how her period is a difficult time for him.
That sounds so terrible.
Oh my God. I almost found my coffee.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry how insensitive and stupid I am laughing, but like, oh my gosh, when you put it so blatantly, that's so stupid.
Yeah, because especially if he's trying to not watch porn. And so what she can do is she can give him a hand job during that time frame, during her period, so that it's not so difficult for him. And then elsewhere, he talks about how if she has a heavier period than normal, or if she's going through her postpartum phase, or if she's simply not feeling her best, she can use oral sex or a hand job to help him out if he's climbing the walls.
Okay.
So if she's postpartum, she's supposed to give him oral sex.
Okay.
Okay.
I think Morgan's having an aneurysm.
Yeah.
So what we want to share with you now, and he also says, like, when you get married, you promise, like, don't get married unless you're willing to have sex every 48 to 72 hours for the rest of your life. And sometimes you're going to feel like it's like you have to force yourself, or like you just want to shove him off of you, but you need to do this. So we have stats. Can we share with you if you believe that?
If you believe that you have to have sex out of obligation.
Here's what happens.
Well, this is
I like this one.
This is only because I feel I have to.
Yeah, but that's because you feel like you're forced.
Oh, right. Okay.
You have to force yourself.
You might have to edit that.
Okay.
You're good.
Stats. We asked women how strongly they agreed to a bunch of things, and one of those was this: I engage in sex with my husband only because I feel I have to. So these are women who have internalized that message from Kevin Lehman.
Sometimes you might have to force yourself.
Yep. So here's what happens. They're 18.6 times more likely to say that when it comes to sex, I could take it or leave it.
Whoa. That's not 18%.
No, 18 times.
Oh, shoot.
Additionally, they are 1.8 times more likely to have experienced sexual pain.
Yeah.
Of course.
And that's primary sexual pain. That's not related to like childbirth. That's just in general. Sex hurts.
Yeah.
Wow.
They are 3.75 times less likely to frequently orgasm. They are 3.91 times less likely to believe that their husbands make their sexual pleasure a priority.
Oh my.
Additionally, they are 6.7 times less likely to be very satisfied with the amount of closeness that they share with their husbands during sex. And they are 10.28 times less likely to get aroused during sexual activity. So what's happening is people like Kevin Lehman, you know, people like Emerson Eggerichs, people like these books that talk so much about men's need for sex. You know, like in sheet music, Kevin Lehman talks about how women can orgasm and women should orgasm.
Okay.
But then they also have these messages so that what happens if sex is painful and you're not orgasming? You're still told, well, you got married, which means you promised to have sex 2 to 3 times a week.
For the rest of your life. Even during your period, apparently.
Even during your period.
Or in the postpartum phase.
And if not, you gotta do something.
So what happens is, think about the kind of woman who says, I don't feel close to my husband, he doesn't make my pleasure a priority, I'm not orgasming, sex hurts, and I could take it or leave it. What does her sex life look like? Is it an intimate knowing of 2 people? Is she married to a man who is truly trying to make her pleasure a priority? Or is she simply being told to enable entitled selfish taking? And being told that this is Christian sexual advice. And that's what we need to ask, is not just, does this have a glimmer of truth? Because it all has a glimmer of truth. Of course you should expect to have sex with relative frequency if you're getting married. That's just a no-brainer. That's just kindness. You get married because you want to have sex with someone too, right? That's one of the reasons. Like, yes, I would like to only have sex with you for the rest of my life. That would sound great. Right? Sure. Like, that's why we have sex. But that doesn't mean we get to tell people, well, you're now in a contract where the timer starts ticking every time you have sex, and if you don't get it done again within 2 to 3 days, you've now defrauded your partner. You know, we don't get to say that. We don't get to tell women that you don't have a choice, because this is what it leads to for a lot of women, and they're given no way out.
Let me tell you, can I tell you a story about Kay? I love this story.
We love the stories. We love the stories.
She was in our focus group. So she when they first got married, she actually really did enjoy sex, but they went through some marriage issues. She had a whole bunch of kids. She started having sexual pain that was kind of getting resolved, but sex had just become a slog. Like it was really all a slog. She wasn't enjoying it anymore. She wasn't orgasmic, but she was still having sex every 72 hours because that's what she was told. And so many of our evangelical resources say this, like Every Man's Battle says it, Power of a Praying Wife, sheet music, they talk about the 72-hour rule that you have to have sex every 72 hours. It's a thing, I guess.
Oh,
anyway.
Wow. Okay.
I never picked that up. My goodness.
Oh yeah, it's in all of our books. It's yes. It all got started. It's not even a medical thing. We were trying to find the root of it because it's in like almost all of our books, and we finally found it in a book by James Dobson from the late 70s. He just said it at one point, and now everyone talks about it like it's gospel, but
Everyone's
it has no basis.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Like, let's include that in our book. Why not?
Let's perpetuate that one. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, so here she is. She's not really liking sex, but she's having sex every 72 hours because she feels like she has to. And eventually she and her husband realize this isn't working. They have a long conversation, and her husband says, I don't want you to do something just because you feel like you have to. Like, I never want this to be a duty. I want this to be something that you're doing because you want to. And so even if we're in the middle of something, if you decide you're just not into it anymore, we'll just stop. Like, we really will. I don't want you to do something out of duty. And it took her a while, but like, she really embraced that. And when she felt free to say no, it's like her sexuality awakened again, and she started to become orgasmic again. And that was the breakthrough. And so you know how often they have sex now?
Pretty frequently, I would assume.
Every 72 hours. It's still every 72 hours. But the difference is they're doing it because she wants to now.
Okay.
And that changed everything. It's not because she has to. It's because this is a culmination of our relationship. This is how we feel about each other. And this is something which we're doing for each other. And it just changed the whole nature of it for her.
That's really encouraging to hear, because as I'm hearing you guys spout all these anecdotes as well as statistics, I'm like, oh my goodness, like that's wild. And I'm just like, I feel like, because this is the beginning of my exposure to a lot of these ideas. I'm not like Morgan, who's kind of been reading all the books and all these things. For me, I'm just like, oh my gosh, wow, like that's horrible. Like I feel like I'm starting to see the subject from the perspective that you guys are offering, rather than just like, okay, cool, sounds good to me, read the book, check, let's go on to the next thing. How does the re-education process like look like? Like, obviously, we're having this conversation as adults. It's an explicit conversation, but like, you have a 12-year-old kid. I don't know that this is the podcast for them. You talk about the importance of educating, like the awakening process, to use Song of Solomon language. How does this education look like in a Christian context? What kind of conversations are we expected to have, allowed to have, like without things getting even more weird than things already are?
Oh, it's so easy to make it even weirder, isn't it? No, I think we'll start from the top. I think if people are currently married and they're needing to work out this stuff, I will say one of the most interesting and hopeful things that we heard from women in our focus groups, because we did focus groups after our survey to tease out how these things play out in different people's lives. So many women said that their husbands were just such a healing force for them, because it's kind of like what you were saying, Justin. You're like, I had never heard a lot of these things. I hadn't really internalized them. It is so often women who are being told this and internalizing this. This is the stuff that is being told at women in youth group. This is what girls are taken aside and told. When you talk about
that's true.
Usually in youth group, boys are
separate.
Yeah, boys are told don't watch porn, and girls are told all the boys around you are always going to want to have sex with you. When you're married, you're going to have to do it, right? And so what happens is, if you are married and you have believed any of these harmful messages, talk to your spouse. Because a lot of people were assuming that this is how their husbands saw sex, and their husbands were like, oh my goodness, no!
Right.
That sounds terrible! And so just recognize that for a lot of people, this is not how your spouse actually wants sex to look. You know,
100%.
and that can be really helpful.
Yeah, because I know for myself, and I'd like to believe most guys feel the same way. Like, we're really not interested in sex with someone who's really not digging it at that moment. Like, you don't want to feel like a slimy door-to-door salesman trying to convince someone to have sex with you. Like, that's not enjoyable at all. You don't want the kind of sexual experience where the other person is left unsatisfied or actually in pain. Like, how's that a turn on in the least bit?
Yeah, and let me also say, you know, we talk to so many guys, and on my blog too, who want to make their wives feel good, and it's their wives who are saying, no, it's okay, don't worry about me, you go ahead, because their wives don't feel like they deserve pleasure, or they don't know how to feel pleasure, or they have a lot of shame. And so this is where, if you're a husband and your wife just doesn't seem into it, like, talk to her, read The Great Sex Rescue with her, and talk to her, like, what has she believed about sex? You know, what did she grow up thinking about sex? Because if you can identify some of those key beliefs and get rid of them, then you can set her free too.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing we need to talk about, where if you're a guy who, like you said, you don't want to feel like a sleazy door-to-door salesman having to cajole and barter to get sex, that also means that you do have the ability to prove to your wife that you are different, right? Like, if she's not into it, stop. Even if she says keep going, be like, I'm just not interested in this. Like, tell her, like, I don't want to initiate for a while. Let's just have sex whenever you want it, because I'll be fine, and I'll prove to you that I'll be fine. You know, like, there are things that husbands can do to help rebuild their wives' sexuality and their wives' sexual autonomy that can then be very sexually empowering for women, and helps that awakening process. So that's, like, for married couples, that's kind of where you kind of start for a lot of them, I think. But when it comes to how do we talk to the next generation, how do we talk to those who are currently getting married, a big thing that I think we just need to start talking about is the fact that arousal exists. And what it feels like. How do you recognize arousal? Like this, I'm talking like premarital kind of people who are dating and engaged in that kind of realm, who are adults who are looking towards marriage, not necessarily your 13-year-olds the same way. But talking about this idea that a wedding ring is not what makes sex orgasmic. Arousal is what makes sex orgasmic. And there are a lot of people out there who have very, very orgasmic sex without a wedding ring. And there are a lot of people who did everything quote unquote right, where sex is a total dud.
Right.
And what's the difference there, right? It's not that this is a punishment or like that somehow we got it wrong, because if someone has good sex and they're not married, then is everything that we have based our entire idea on wrong? No, because we don't believe in this weird punishment reward system. This is just biology. You know, at some point, you know, just do the things that your body was created to do and help yourself awaken. And if we started telling couples, like, this is one thing, whenever I'm at bachelorette parties, like you were saying, Morgan, whenever I'm talking to girls who have limited sexual experience or where I'm not sure what's going on, I always just tell them, you know what? Maybe try intercourse last. Orgasm a bunch of different times first. Just don't start on hard mode. That's all I say. Like, just don't start on hard mode. I was like, if you want more information, I have some resources to send you, but just don't start on hard mode, you know? And
That's so good.
And I think that if we have a few of these 4 conversations where we free couples to say, first of all, you don't have to have sex on the wedding night. You have sex when you're both aroused and you both want it for the first time.
Yeah.
You know, like you get married, and then if that's day 5 on your honeymoon, great. It's day 5 on your honeymoon. Hopefully you have like 70 years of orgasmic sex in front of you. Waiting a couple of days will not change anything for the worse, but it might change things for the better.
Right.
You know? And I think that's just the conversation that we're missing, is we talk a lot about how just get to the finish line and then you can just bang each other's brains out all you want. But that's usually pretty one-sided.
Yeah.
If you honestly are going at it for the first time and she's not aroused. So that's one thing. But then when you talk about our high schoolers and our children,
Right.
a lot of the conversation right now has been about fear-based tactics versus actual information.
Yeah, 100%.
I'll give you a really good example that makes everyone, I'm the butt of this joke, so this is good.
Okay.
When I was 12 years old, I was super into Brio magazine.
Okay.
Like super into Brio magazine.
By focus on the
Sorry,
family.
for all the dudes who don't know what that is, what is that magazine?
It was
I feel
a magazine put
left
out
out
by
of the
Focus on
party.
the Family for girls aged like 11, 12 to like 16. And then they had one called Brio and Beyond for like 15 to 20 or so.
Okay.
So this was a magazine that I read religiously, and it was very purity culture based.
So this would have been like 2007, 8, 9 kind of thing. Yeah.
And I was this innocent little 12-year-old, and I read a Brio magazine article that was telling us about how you can get STDs and STIs even if you haven't had sex.
Okay.
But here's the thing. They had just spent quite a few issues explaining to us that any physical contact was sexual intimacy. You hold hands, you've been sexually intimate. You kiss a boy, you've been sexually intimate. And my sweet Brio sisses, how can you possibly say that you're pure when you've done things even if you haven't had sex? So this is what's been in my head. Is any physical contact is sexual intimacy. And so then they have this letter that they put out from an older sister to a younger sister, this like kind of short story kind of thing about how she has herpes and they haven't even had sex.
It was just from sexual contact.
It was just from touching. And they talk about sexual contact, and they do mention at some point later that something about oral or genital contact.
Sure.
But I didn't know what oral
You don't know
sex
what that
was
is.
at 11 and a half.
Of course not. Why would you?
I didn't know what manual stimulation meant. So I thought that if you kissed a boy, you could get herpes.
Oh, no.
And chlamydia and AIDS and stuff like that. Like when I was 12. And so I was terrified of touching boys.
You're like,
because
no,
I
please.
thought that if I touched a boy, I had a slight risk of getting an STD.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
So,
Problematic.
the kind of tactic that we've used, right? It is the funniest article I have ever read, and I found it again on the Wayback Machine. By the way, if any of your anyone who's watching has ever used to read Brio and you're just curious if it's just as bad as you remember, check out the Wayback Machine. It is amazing. But when you look at that's how my generation was raised. There's no real information. There's no actual education on what does oral or genital manual touching actually mean. How are STIs transmitted? No discussion about anything like this. It's just about don't do it because you're going to have to tell everyone who you ever come into contact with again. You're going to be so ashamed. You've lost your worth. You're going to only be able to. They actually talked about what kind of guy is going to want to marry me now that I have this disease. Like it was horrendous. And I think the conversation doesn't necessarily start with like making sure we're having explicit sex positive conversations with 10-year-olds. as much as it just really focuses on having access to actual information at an age-appropriate time and not doing fear tactics before they get the actual information. I mean, no fear tactics at all.
Yeah.
But especially not as the introduction to sex is don't do it is not healthy.
Yeah.
The introduction to sex when you're 10 or 11 and you're learning about this kind of stuff, the first thing we jump to should not be don't do it. The first thing we jump to is here's how your body was made.
Because kids at 10 and a half will pledge to never even look at someone from the opposite gender ever again, right? Like that. So it's very manipulative.
Yeah.
Like, you tell a 10-year-old for the first time, he puts his penis there, and she's like, I will never do that. I will promise never, ever,
I will never
ever
do it. I will never do it. Yeah.
And I think that's just the big difference is if we have an honest conversation about the information, then we'll have the conversation about what's the clitoris, what is arousal. But you can do it at the appropriate times as they get more curious, as they get older. And as parents, like, you can kind of let parents have their own ability to know what their kids need. But I think that it just needs to start with actual education and not fear tactics and not discussions about worth or purity as much as, you know, agency, consent, appropriateness, and whether or not you are respecting and honoring the people around you.
And I think so much... if we want our kids to have what I would call a biblical sexual ethic, like if we do want our kids to wait for marriage, you need to tell them why, and not just God's going to be mad at you and no one's going to want to marry you and you're going to be damaged goods. Like, just talk to them about things like, you know, emotional connection versus sexual connection and how you can feel a false sense of intimacy when it's not there, and you want to be sure that you're choosing someone for the right reasons, and like just talk to them like they're people. You know, and don't try to scare them. But there's one other thing. Justin was asking how we change the conversation. I think one of the best ways to change the conversation as adults too is to start standing up against a lot of these books.
Right.
Because a lot of our evangelical books are actually very toxic.
Right.
When it comes to this. And like if your church is running a love and respect Bible study, like book study, then speak up and say, you know, that was actually named the #1 most harmful book. In this survey, of 20,000 women, like this was the #1 most book that most people named as the most harmful, right?
It also scored the worst on our survey.
And it scored the worst on our rubric.
Wait, which one was it?
Love and Respect by Emerson Eggerichs.
Very good to know. Okay.
Well, and also, like, I mean, Justin, you've mentioned Every Man's Battle a few times. Like, Every Man's Battle has an actual depiction of child rape that is not talked about as if it's rape.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wait.
Yeah, no, there's a youth leader. Yeah, no, so in Every Man's Battle, a youth leader, he tells a story about how this youth leader was in the car with this 15-year-old who was in his care at that point, and he started flirting with her and daring her, like, I bet you wouldn't take your pants off, and she did, and then he couldn't control himself, and so they had sex. Whoa. And the moral of the story is, oh, look how terrible, because now this man might face repercussions, and isn't this so bad? Never mentioned that it was child rape. Never mentioned that it may have even classified as some sort of like abuse of power, clergy, sexual abuse on top of that. Never mentioned that the girl was the victim. It was this poor man who couldn't handle himself around this promiscuous sexual young woman who is not a young woman. She's a child.
Yeah.
And like that, those are the kinds of things where because we have this rose-colored glasses on when we read these books, we look at them, we say, but they say they're Christian, so it must be right. You know, they use the right Christianese, so it must be okay. And what we're hoping to do is to empower people to be like the Bereans, which Paul says in Acts, where we're supposed to test, we're supposed to read things through, and we're supposed to not just take everything at face value. That's in the Bible, right? Like Paul urges people to read his letters, like the Bereans did, where they questioned, they prodded, and they didn't just blindly accept. Because if we are able to become a church that says you have to prove that you are safe and that you know the gospel for us to actually accept you, versus just, well, as long as you have the right labels, we'll accept you, right? And I think that we just haven't been told that we're allowed to question. We haven't been told that you're not a bad person if you disagree with someone who has power. And we haven't been told that it's more important to look like Christ than to have Christ-like, to have Christianese language. Yeah. Right? Because there's no way that in Every Man's Battle, multiple actually depictions of sexual assault could have gone by, and men could have been told to treat their wives like methadone vials for their porn addiction.
Oh yeah, that's actually in that. Once you quit lust cold turkey, or once he quits lust, be like a merciful vial of methadone for him. So you're supposed to have sex. You are his methadone. It says it twice. It calls wives the methadone for their husband's sex
in
addictions.
the first edition of Every Man's
Yeah.
Battle. And this is the kind of thing
Jim
where
Morgan's gonna have. You let Morgan respond.
I am floored. And actually, so just to get just a little personal here for a second, my marriage, when I first got married, I expected all of the things that we've talked about. Like, I expected my husband to want to have sex all the time because that's what all my married friends said, and I was just gonna have to do it. And I was like, okay, like, I guess, like, I'll have sex. And then that wasn't my experience. And it was actually like I was pursuing my husband for like sexual intimacy, and he was rejecting me. And it was this whole thing. It was actually because of a lot of guilt and a lot of shame because of porn use. And I'm hearing what you're saying, and that thing of like me being a methadone was actually my husband Tyler's belief going into marriage. Because I remember him saying when all of this started happening and we started kind of exposing the reason why he was rejecting me, it was because he thought when we got married and he could have sex with me, that he would be better. Like, as soon as he could have sex and we could engage in this, then my addiction will go away. Like, then I won't lust after all these women. Then I won't turn to porn whenever I'm feeling stressed or whatever it was. Guess what? It didn't work. He didn't even want to have sex because he was so wrapped up in his stuff. And so this is just like so incredible to hear. And I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, and that's the issue is we talk about porn as if it's sex, but just in another realm.
Yeah.
And sex addiction and pornography use, that's not the same thing as sex. It's actually fundamentally different. And that's why we can't simply say, well, you can just sub it. Because it's not the same thing. Like the craving is for a distorted view of what sex is meant to be. Right?
100%.
It's a using of another person, not an experiencing with. And so when books like Every Man's Battle cheapen sex to something that she gives him so that he doesn't turn to, his bad habit, what it's doing is it's actually turning sex, which God created to be intimate and, personal. And it's making it an impersonal substitute for sin. And objectifying a person is not okay because you're married. And if we're seeing sex as who do I get to objectify and still I'm okay, versus seeing sex as something fundamentally different than the pornographic view of sex. Seeing sex as not only separate from pornography, but on a spectrum, it is on either ends.
Right.
That's how we start to understand that these messages about how we've talked about, even to kids as young as 11, about pornography, has actually groomed an entire generation of young men, and I think young women as well, to simply see sex in only objectifying terms. Boys are told, you're never going to be free from this. You're always going to struggle with this. And the only hope that you have is to find a woman to channel your lustful desires onto in a God-sanctioned way. What men are often told in books like Every Man's Battle, or in books like, what's the other one that talks about lust badly? Every Heart Restored. I mean, they're by the same people.
They're all the same.
But this idea that your best bet is to find a woman to unleash on. And women are told your best bet is to only be objectified by one man.
Right.
And that is fundamentally opposite to what sex is. And what we're seeing right now is the fruit of that, right? We're seeing the fruits of that coming out in this research. Low orgasm rates, low arousal rates.
Every Man's Battle never once mentions her experience of sex. It doesn't say that she can feel good. It doesn't say that she can want it. It doesn't say that it's intimate. It says that before, when you were lusting, you would go to her for 5 bowls of sexual gratification a week. But now that you've quit lusting, you'll go to her for 10 bowls of sexual gratification a week.
It's
no.
And
I resonate
when your church is running every man's battle studies, or especially every young man's battle studies, speak up and say, no, that's not right.
And by the way, if anyone wants a better alternative, Surfing for God is great.
Yeah, Surfing for God by
There you go.
John Cusick, or The Sexually Healthy Man by Andrew Bauman. Both really good books on porn and lust.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you talk real briefly for the guys, because that's exactly why I started reading Every Man's Battle, was because of the battle with porn. For those who are on their way to Amazon right now to buy the 2 books that you just mentioned, what were those again?
So Surfing for God
by Michael
John Cusick, and The Sexually Healthy Man by Andrew Bauman.
So for every guy who's going to Amazon right now to buy those books, what is kind of the alternative worldview that's offered here? What is being replaced with concepts like bouncing the eyes or starve the sumo or whatever those,
Right.
those
Well,
things are?
the whole problem with bouncing your eyes is that it sees women in the same terms that lust does. Okay, like if you go onto his website and you look at the Steve Arterburn website and you look at bouncing your eyes, the first step in learning how to do this properly is to know your enemy. And who is your enemy? It's women who are jogging.
Wow.
Like it literally says that women are your enemy.
Yeah, that's how the book opens. I remember that.
What?
anecdote.
Okay. Yeah. So the whole idea of bouncing your eyes becomes, I'm not going to look at a woman with lust. And so women are therefore dangerous to you. We just need to say, Jesus did not refuse to look at women. What Jesus did was decide to truly see women.
Oh,
That's right. That's right.
That's good.
Yeah.
And if you want to get over lust, it's not about not looking at women. It's to choose to see them as being made in the image of God. It's like you learn how to talk to women instead of only seeing them in sexual terms. And that's what Every Man's Battle does, is it trains you to see all women in only sexual terms. And the other thing is it equates sexual attraction with lust.
Yeah.
And I think so many men have had a whole
yes.
heaping pile of shame put on them, which God never intended them to have. Jesus said, if you look at a woman with lust, you've committed adultery. So there's 2 criteria there. You need to look, which is a deliberate action, and you need to do it with lust, which is a deliberate intent. If you notice a woman has breasts and you find that attractive, you have neither looked nor lusted.
Right. It's like, oh yeah, she does. She's got boobs. Yeah.
It's you've noticed and you've had a biological reaction, and then you can go on with your day and think nothing more of it. And we need to stop telling men and women, by the way, because women can be visual as well, that just being sexually attracted to someone means that you've sinned.
And I think this comes back to our whole idea of we need to redeem the conversation around sexuality, both for men and for women, because I think so many men, especially growing up in the church, are raised to be afraid of their sexuality.
Yeah.
Because what they're told is you're not in control of it.
Yes. Oh,
Right?
yeah.
They're told pornography's everywhere, attractive women, you're in an over-sexualized culture, there's nothing you can do to escape it, and so the best thing you can do is try to close your eyes as much as possible.
Yeah, straight
And
up.
that's such a that's just such a stressful way to live.
And it's a terrible strategy. It
It's a
doesn't
terrible
work.
strategy.
Well, and
Yeah.
also, frankly, we are not the first overly sexualized culture. I mean, if even a preliminary Google search of what Greco-Roman times were like,
Right.
or like the times of like antiquity when a lot of early church writings were done, it was like I'm sorry, temple prostitutes were a thing, and they were everywhere. And there was a highly sexualized culture. We are not unique.
Yeah.
We aren't. And I think that when we raise boys to think that they are innately dangerous, that's me. And I have to say, I'm a mother of a son. So this hits very personally.
I'm so glad you are. I really am.
But I don't want my boy to be raised in a church that thinks that he's one step away from becoming a predator simply because he is male. And that's really the impression that I get from a lot of these books, is that the best a boy can aim for is to objectify or harm as few women as possible. And that is not the best that my son can aim for. That is not the best that men can aim for, because men are also created in the image of God.
Hello.
And that's what's missing in the conversation. And so I think for any of the guys who are watching who are struggling with pornography or struggling with lust, I think first of all, allowing yourself to be free of the very shaming messages about male sexuality that a lot of us have been given is a first step, right? Like, you're allowed to realize that someone's really beautiful. You're even allowed to enjoy looking at beauty if you're not thinking, I want to sexually objectify her. Like, you know, like if I'm looking at one of my friends and he gets like a nice haircut and is in a nice, I'm like, you look really nice today. Because I'm a woman, no one thinks anything of it. You know?
But guys don't really have that latitude to say, hey, Morgan, you look great today, by the way.
Right.
The way you did your makeup, your hair, love it.
Yeah.
But like, why is it, right? And I think that's what we need to recognize, is just because someone is male doesn't mean they don't have control over their sexuality or their sexual urges. Like, and I think that's just the freeing message we need to give men, is you don't need to be ruled by this. There is freedom, there is deliverance.
Yes.
And that
Amen.
it's not something you're just going to have to settle for second best your whole life.
And that actually is a lot of what we talked about in here too.
Yeah.
So we you know, it's not only a book for women.
No,
like,
it's not.
Like, a lot of our conversation about lust is really to set men free as well. Yeah. So, and let's just talk about this stuff better. Let's just not be weird. Like, can we just not be weird? It shouldn't be that hard not to be weird, you know?
Yeah. That's like when I found out that you guys were a mother-daughter duo, I was like, what? And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that, because I love that they are a mother-daughter duo, because it shouldn't be weird. Like, we need to be talking about this, and you can do it with your mom, like, for Pete's sake, because we have, like, even the word sexualize, like, oh, we over-sexualize. Oh, you're just like sexualizing. It almost feels like the wrong word to use, because sex in itself is beautiful and pure and good. And so to over-sexualize something, in my mind, makes it even more beautiful and even more pure and even more intimate, right? Because it's more of like a lust issue that's the problem. Like, we've lustified. Eroticized.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've over eroticized. I've been trying to think of a word that explains how I'm feeling about it, and that's it. Because it is beautiful. It is, and I have only read like the first few pages in The Great Sex Rescue, but I love how you outline what sex should be. Because we believed a lot of lies about what it is that are actually not true. And a huge part of that is like a pure, pleasurable thing. And we can talk about pure and pleasurable things without being weird. Like, for Pete's sake, this is a possibility for us, but we have so many lies wrapped up in it that we can't even touch it. Oh man, you guys, this is really fun. I really enjoy these conversations. Oh my word. Okay, so yeah, please, Justin, go ahead, because I have a lot of things buzzing around, but I'm like, how do I formulate questions? Sure. So yeah.
So we have the book that's out, but I noticed on your website you also have a number of courses that have come out. And in surveying 20,000 people, I'm guessing you've got to see people go through progressions and transformations. And I'm really curious, what does it look like when someone is kind of raised under this toxic purity culture and they're able to go through the work of reeducation? What does the other side look like?
Yeah, here, I can actually tell a story about this. One of the women that we talked to in our focus groups, we call her Sandra in the book.
Okay.
She was, when she was married, she was greeted with vaginismus, as many women are. She struggled a lot with guilt and shame around sex. In fact, she said every time that she had sex with her husband, the next morning she would do devotionals and confess, just in case something they did wasn't sanctioned. She couldn't look at herself in the mirror after they had sex. She very strongly believed that sex was just something that it was a tool that women were given so that their men wouldn't leave, right? Like, that's very much how she saw sex. It wasn't for her at all. She would lie there trying to stay as still as possible. And so her poor husband had no idea what was going on in her head. And after like 20 years of marriage, she sits down and she says, there's just gotta be something better, right? So she starts researching, she starts reading, she starts looking into, she finds us. And she started acknowledging and reading about this idea of sex where God created it to be an ecstatic knowing, this intimate, you're supposed to feel pleasure. Like, this isn't wrong to enjoy sex, but rather God created sex for you to enjoy. It's not just something you have to get through. It's something that is made for you. And so she goes to her husband and she explains everything that's been going on, where this poor man has been trying to talk to her about it for 20 years. And he is just floored. And he says, "Oh my word, woman, no, we don't want any of that here. Let's just throw all of it out," right? She told him about how she was believing that she had to have sex with him or else he'd watch pornography or leave her, that she never felt like she was able to say no. So anytime he kissed her or touched her or hugged her, she felt it as a threat because it meant sex was coming and she had no choice. She said that, you know, she felt guilty anytime that he did anything that made her feel good. She said that sex hurt. Like, this man was just sitting there and he's just having all this piled on him. And he was amazing. He sat her down and said, "We are going to fix this." She started seeing pelvic floor physiotherapy. He stopped initiating sex. And additionally, he put in a bunch of code words and safe words, even for the most vanilla of things, like a kiss. Right? So that if she, so that he could kiss her and let her know, this isn't going anywhere. I just wanted to kiss you. And they started having rules where, like, you know, she could stop it in the middle of anything that was going on. And he, at every step of the way, helped her work through those negative beliefs, and she started putting positive ones in her head instead. So what she said she would do is when she got a message that says, "You have to do this," she would replace it with, "No, I matter and God created me to matter and my husband thinks that I matter too." So every single time that came into her head, she'd replace it with something positive. When she put it in where "this is bad," "No, God created this to be good." "This isn't for me." "No, I was created to enjoy this and I was created to experience pleasure." Right? Like, just get it over with. "No, I deserve to have my experience matter here." So every single time she had a negative belief, she would replace it with a positive one. And after going through a lot of physiotherapy, therapy, and just this positive thing, and her husband proving to her what it actually meant to love his wife like Christ loves the church, like to be sacrificially loving, to honestly put her needs first. What she said is her body physically changed. That's the word she uses. Her body physically changed. The pain started going away. She started becoming more orgasmic. She actually wanted sex. And for the first time, she was able to look in the mirror right after having sex and say, "God loves you and God loves what you did in there." And that was a big part of her journey.
Awesome.
Like being able to stand in front of herself, look at herself straight in the eye and not feel shame. And the thing she said at the end of our interview, which was so cool, she said, "My devotionals went from guilt-riddled confessions to gratitude and thankfulness to God."
Oh, I love it.
Right? And that's just, there is hope and you can get through this, and we can, you know, whatever is learned can be unlearned, right? Like our brains are very, very adaptable organs. We don't get set in stone. You can relearn. It just takes time and it takes effort. But it's so worth it. And what it means is we have to allow the light to chase out the darkness, right? You just have to let it in, even if it gets rid of some stuff that's nice little security blankets.
Right.
Like for a lot of women, that is the fear that if they don't have sex every 3 days, what if he does watch porn? Is it her fault? You know? And what if like what if there are issues that come up because sex is the only thing that's holding us together? You know, are we willing to risk having to have those difficult conversations so that we can experience what we were always meant to have? Are we willing to risk some discomfort so that we can find true healing and health? And I just think that's a conversation we need to have, even if it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Amen. Well, thank you guys so much for engaging us in this conversation and kind of leading the way. It's awesome to know that there are people out there who are willing to confront kind of the culture that exists and the systems that are. And I'm so excited to be able to read your book, to know that it's not just studies and anecdotes, but it's also scripture based. It's like kind of the perfect trifecta of all things. I'm really looking forward to it. Morgan, anything else that you wanted to add or ask before we close out?
I just am so excited and so grateful about the conversation surrounding almost like identity in sex, right? Like we can stop talking about men like they're these monsters just in need of this thing that women have to give them, right? Like men, like we are all better than the worst thing that we've ever done. Like we are all more than that. And so I'm just really excited about like women and the conversation surrounding women being more than just like, yeah, this is just something you're gonna have to do because you can do it, like because you have the equipment. Like you are a child, like you are beautiful, and you've been given this gift called the clitoris, right? Hello, like this is your amazing little gem that your body has, but you are even more than your clitoris. Like, yeah, you have, but you are this beautiful daughter, and you're dynamic, and you're worth beautiful things because God says so. And so I'm just really excited about what that conversation means for sex and for the way that we have it and the way that we talk about it. And so I am just excited to read this thing and tell everybody about it and to just continue having conversations about women and the lies that they're believing about themselves, which means they then believe lies about sex. But yeah, he's just so good, and we can't put him in this little box anymore in the same way that we're putting sex in a box, because he created it and he is part of it. And we get to engage in this beautiful intimacy with each other because he knows us. And I love the Bible verses that you use to kind of outline that. Like Adam knew Eve. And you're like, oh, what? Like they can't use sex? Like God's embarrassed? No, like they knew each other in the same way that God knows us so intimately and so deeply. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited. And you guys are so awesome. Let's hang out sometime.
Sounds good.
I'm so pumped about it.
Real quick, for everyone who wants to dive down the rabbit hole when it comes to this subject, I know that you guys have your book that's out. There's also a handful of courses. Sheila, on your website, if you could walk us through that. And I'm so sorry, I don't know what else exists. I know your kind of whole family is doing amazing things when it comes to social media, and I don't want to start listing them in the event that I miss more. But can you just kind of steer us and direct us to what is relevant to this conversation?
Well, if you go to lovehonorandvacuum.com, you'll find everything. So that's the blog, lovehonorandvacuum.com. We have our newest course is our orgasm course. And we wrote that course before the book was published, but after we did all the research. So it's based on all the surveys that we did and
a bunch of extra. And I also looked at all the peer-reviewed research in the area as well. So there's our research and there's all the other stuff too.
And there's a husband's add-on. So it's a course women can take, but there's also an add-on that husbands can take to help their wives. So that's super fun. We have our weekly Bare Marriage podcast, which you can listen to everywhere. It's just called Bare Marriage. Usually it's Becca and me together, plus other guests, and sometimes my husband. It's really a weird family. But most of all, we just want to change the evangelical conversation about sex. So Great Sex Rescue, it is an awesome book. It's super easy to read. And there's little pretty charts everywhere if you're a numbers person. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. Again, if you want access to any of her courses, there is an affiliate link below this video. It actually is one of the ways it does help support this channel. So if you're interested in the orgasm course or whatever other courses that she has, use one of the links below, and it does help support this channel. Other thing is, you guys should check out Morgan's story. She mentioned a little bit about her relationship to her husband Tyler, his porn addiction, what that meant for their marriage, and how ultimately they became free from all these things when they understood some really key and important truths. And so there's a podcast called Death to Life that another friend of mine named Richard hosts, and their story is one of the prominent stories. If you go back through the archive, you'll end up seeing my story as well. But I highly, highly recommend that you check it out, the Death to Life podcast. All links to all the resources, including books, will be in the description below. So if you didn't get it when you were taking notes, you're welcome. We'll see you guys in the next episode.